My name is Gene Flannery, and I'm so glad to be here with you again today. And we're going to be talking today about communicating cross-culturally. And again, I have a little bit of expertise in this area because I've worked on, well, I'm currently working on my 5th language, if you can believe that. Now, I'm not going to tell you that I'm fluent in 5 languages, but I'm saying I've worked on 5 languages. So at one point I was actually trilingual. I could speak 3 languages fluently all at one time. So that's kind of a little bit unusual, I think. But as a new missionary, you're being sent to a foreign culture, a new place, and to a place where people speak another language. And for us here, those old-timers at WIM that have been here for a long time, remember the requirements were like you had to learn the language we were going, and that was kind of what we were just told. And I want to encourage you, this is the really importance of doing that. So in starting out this session, I wanted to talk about language acquisition. Some of the process of actually learning it. And again, you have to realize this is the voice of experience after speaking, like I said, working on my 5th language as an adult. So I've actually 6 languages if you include English, which I learned when I was pretty young. So here's a few things that I've learned along the way. So whatever language that you're trying to learn. The very first point is this: be patient with the language learning process. Patience, 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 please. And what I always tell people, learning another language is more like a marathon than a sprint. For so much in our American culture, we think speed is everything, but you really can't rush the process of learning another language. Just think of when you were young, first learning English. Of course, you don't remember probably those first few syllables and words that you spoke, but you remember that process, or you've had children of your own, or you've seen other little children going through that process by their 2nd and 3rd year, and how they're speaking, and they're stumbling along with words, they're mixing up the sentence orders. Well, that's all fine for children, but as adults it's kind of embarrassing. We get impatient with that process. But I want to encourage you, there's no other way to do it. There's no other way to learn another language but starting at the beginning and just patiently working through that. And by the way, you will make mistakes. So first of all, just be patient with the process. Secondly, engage regularly with the people that God is sending you to. And what I want you to remember here is that language acquisition is more a social activity than an academic pursuit. As Westerners, we are so comfortable when we say, I'm taking a class. Anytime we want to learn something, we say, well, if I just take a class, then I'll learn it. Well, languages aren't quite that easy. You can sit in a classroom, you could have a book, you could learn grammar structure, you could even, see word list. But I guarantee you, the very first time you actually go out and try to speak to somebody in that language, you're going to fumble all over it. You're going to come back feeling like a total failure, and you'll never want to go talk that language again because of the embarrassment you have. But there's no other way to do it. And there's something so different about actually speaking to a live person that speaks that language than it is trying to memorize a list of words. So you do have to get out there and actually talk with people. So remember that. The third thing that I always kind of emphasize is that make cultural fluency your goal as well. So it's not just learning a language, but you want to learn as much as you can about that culture. Because really, language and culture are totally inseparable. Languages actually are the gift, or really the production of any particular culture. Every culture produces a language so its people can communicate. And so you really can't separate the two and say, well, I don't really want to know that much about their culture or what they believe or how they behave. I just want to learn how to preach the gospel to them. It doesn't work that way. You've got to embrace the total cultural. Another simple thing I always tell students is this: use it or lose it. So if you don't use what you're already learning, you will never advance in language learning. So in other words, don't wait until you're perfectly fluent or have, you know, a 10,000 word vocabulary before you start using what you have. Use what you have very simply, the very simple structures you have, and then you just build, you really need to build on that. And I've actually have met people that have actually lost their native language. Can you imagine that? You grew up speaking a particular language, and probably I'm going to guess that these people, they remember speaking it as a home when they were younger. As they got older, English was more used in their home. And then actually by the time then they were in their early 20s, they no longer spoke the language that they were raised in. Isn't that amazing? You can actually lose your native language if you don't use it. Well, how much more then if you're learning a foreign language, if you're not willing to use it and to regularly, that you're going to lose it. All right. Another thing I always teach as well as far as language acquisition is I say attack the verbs, right? And what I tell my students, without verbs you sound like Tarzan. All right, me Tarzan, you Jane, and verbs are really the, we can say the nouns are the foundation, or that type of thing, but the verbs are what really moves the language along, right? Anytime you want to communicate, you want to be able to say the action that's going to happen, or the state of being. Verbs are just integral. And what's so difficult with verbs is all the conjugation that goes involved, right? And I was just thinking when I learned Spanish, I remember the first semester it's going so slow, we were introduced, I think, to 5 different verb tenses. And that was so challenging. And then the second semester, they threw on all the other 13 more verb conjugations, and it was just so overwhelming to think that look at all these different ways that you can nuance sentences and these verbs and how they change. But there's no way of getting around it. You really need to just really work on it and be aggressive with learning the verbs. And the final thing I want to say in this session is just set realistic goals. Everyone starts at the beginning. Now you have in front of you a little sheet that I kind of put together. And you'll see on the top, level 5, it says total fluency. And I know just as you're starting out in your language learning process, you're thinking, well, that's what I'm going to shoot for. I want to be totally fluent. Because no one wants to go down at the bottom where it says minimal acquisition, level 1. But as I've mentioned earlier, setting realistic goals, work up the ladder, work up these steps, all right? So don't try to go to total fluency at first. But let's just kind of go through each one. You'll kind of get a feel with what these different levels feel like. And I kind of feel like I've been in the 5 different languages I've worked on. I've been at these different levels. Now, total fluency, number 5, you speak like a native, use idiomatic expressions, so you're very comfortable with them. You understand every spoken word, and you can read and write on an adult level. Now, the only total fluencies I've reached so far has been in English. Now you're thinking, now wait a minute, you said you were trilingual at one point. Now I'm talking about total fluency. Being so immersed in that culture that you understand all the different nuances of what's being spoken. I lived in Mexico 4 years, and I didn't get the total fluency. All right? I didn't get the total fluency. The people that I've seen that I think that probably could reach it, that come into a native culture as an adult, I would say either those that have just years there, like 20 years, or more specifically those that marry within the culture and have children, raise children in that language. Then I think there's maybe a possibility. But in most situations, if you're going in as an adult, total fluency is probably almost impossible. Almost impossible. Experts tell us that if you don't start learning a language before you're an adolescent, that you'll always have an accent and you'll always be a little bit on the outside and never be totally there. All right, so that's total fluency. Look at the next level, high fluency. You can express yourself clearly, you understand the context of every conversation, and you can read and write above a high school level. Now that's where I ended up probably after 4 years in Mexico. I could, and to this day, I can understand most conversations. When I talk to a Hispanic, Latino person, I'm able to converse. I may not understand every word, everything that's spoken, all the particular nuances, but I understand the gist of that conversation, and I can, anything that I think in English, I can express that in Spanish. Maybe not like a native speaker would speak, but at least I can express myself to where they would understand what I'm trying to communicate. So it's high fluency, level 4. Look at level 3. Low fluency, high acquisition. You express yourself in most conversations. You can understand what's spoken to you directly. You can read and write on a high school level. Now, this was probably my third language. Cebuano, when I lived in the Philippines, I lived on an island 25 miles wide by 125 miles long. And when I first arrived on that island, I was informed by the natives, by the people that lived there, that you don't have to learn our language. We speak English. And so I was in that situation thinking that, well, great. I don't have to go through all that process I had to go through. Those 4 years in Mexico, especially the first 2 years of really struggling to understand Spanish. I'll just speak English to these people and it'll be okay. Well, after about 1 week, I realized their English ain't too good. Isn't too well. Why don't I'm 32 years old, why don't I try to learn their language? I learned Spanish, so why can't I, as an adult, learn Cebuano? And so I began that process. And this was the level I achieved. I could express myself in most conversations, not all. I could understand, but I could only understand what was spoken to me directly. It was amazing. I could sit down and talk with a Filipino one-on-one, talking about whatever thing we'd be talking about. And then someone else would walk up and they would start talking together, and I didn't understand them. I couldn't understand them. I was just talking with this person. But that's, that happens on that level. You have your vocabulary is increasing, you can understand quite a bit, but of course when they start talking, you kind of miss it. Now level 2 would be no fluency and low acquisition. You can express simple concepts and phrases. You understand little of what's not spoken to you directly, and you may not be able to read and write. And so this was probably my fourth language. When I was in my 40s, I started learning Punjabi from North India. And at that point of my missionary career, my life, I realized something. I was starting to plant a church among the Punjabis who are living in the Manila area of the Philippines. But I realized one thing. I'm never going to go to India to live. And so how realistically was it for me living in the Philippines where they spoke Tagalog, and all of them spoke some Tagalog, and many of them are married to Filipino wives. How realistically is it for me to be able to think that I'm going to become fluent in their culture? And so I set a lower ceiling for myself. Now this is my fourth language, right? So I was already trilingual, but I realized even with that I'm not going to get to that level 3 that I was with Cebuano, probably. The writing is, they don't use Roman numerals. Their pronunciation was totally different. Verb usage was totally different than in English. There was no books, no schools to go to. So this was level 2 that I set for myself. And because I was traveling to India quite a bit, I set a goal for myself. I studied very intensely for 6 months before I took my first trip to India. And I set off, I said, I want to learn 3 areas to speak about. I want to learn to talk about travel, so travel terms. I want to talk about family, because I was going to be visiting some of the Punjabis in the Philippines that we were ministering to. We were going to visit their families in India. And I wanted to talk about God. So I narrowed it down. I says, that's all the terminology I wanted. I really focused for 6 months. And sure enough, when I got to India, we got into situations where English was not spoken, and I was able to get along. I didn't understand everything, but I was communicating the very little that I did. So let that be an encouragement to you. Level 1 then would be minimal acquisition. You know a collection of phrases, you can construct elementary sentences, you can only understand what's spoken to you directly and slowly, and you cannot read or write in that language. So, when we're looking at this, we're just talking about this just very minimum of you being there as a guest in their country, of you working on their language to be able to express this very simple things. And as I mentioned earlier, your best way to go about this is to look at all of these levels and shoot for level 1. Once you get that done, then try to go up to number 2, 3, 4, then, you know, if you want to shoot for total fluency, go for it. It never hurts to set your goals high, but to be patient with that process as you go. And again, I say that as a veteran language learner. When I was learning my third language, Cebuano, the one where they told me I don't have to learn it because they could speak to me in English, I remember the first year that I was trying to learn their language, they wouldn't even respond back to me in their language because their English was better than my Cebuano, so they would always talk back to me in English. And it took about a year before I got enough vocabulary going where they finally would start talking back to me in their language. And so it's a goal. You just need to set it for yourself and just realize that I want to do this. I can do this. I can speak to these people in this language. Let me end up with another story as far as language learning. When I did arrive in the Philippines, I got there just about the same time a missionary from Southern California arrived. We became friends, and he decided the same thing that I did. You know, I need to study the language. You know, I'm a guest here in this culture. I need to study Cebuano. And so he did the same thing that I did. Basically, for 6 months, he got a tutor and studied Cebuano. About 4 years after we were there together, he happened to be in a meeting where I was the speaker. I came up to the podium. I opened my Cebuano Bible. I read the Bible verse, the text that I was going to minister out of. And for about the next 40 minutes, I spoke to the crowds in Cebuano without using one English word. And then I ended my sermon, and I remember him coming up to me afterwards. He goes, "Gene, I got here the same time you did. I worked on Cebuano for 6 months, and I thought, this is too hard for a foreigner to learn this language. It's too hard. I gave up." He says, "But I understood a lot of what you were saying. I wish I would have kept trying to learn Cebuano." I want to encourage you. You will get discouraged along the way. At some point, you get tired of talking like a baby. You just go, forget this. I'm not going to go this anymore. I don't want to be laughed at anymore. I'm just going to speak English and get an interpreter. Let me encourage you. Keep on trying. It's worth the vale la pena, we say in Spanish. You know, it's worth the effort to get in there and just work yourself up on these steps. Be patient with the process, but yes, do learn that language.